Bet the Board in conjunction with NASCAR presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Wormy.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, a Bet the Board production in conjunction with NASCAR. We take our attention away from the fiasco that was at Pocono, more on that later, and shift our attention to Indianapolis Motor Speedway. We'll be on the road course this weekend. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and racing analyst, Chris Wormy. And Worm, a little bit of drama last Sunday from Pocono. Thankfully, you and I were not involved, but it was a hell of a storyline to try and follow Sunday afternoon.
Oh my gosh, I went to my girlfriend's parents for dinner, and it's a little bit of a drive with poor service. I've never had so many missed DMs, tweets. I thought someone had died. Like, there were so many people that had messaged me over what happened that I was happy to see that everyone was okay, but it's shocking. I mean, it's one thing to have Hamlin, but to have, Hamlin and Kyle really kind of adds to this this whole kind of fiasco that, like you said, was Pocono this weekend.
Simply incredible. And for those new to the Stay Green podcast, we typically divide things up around here. Stage one consists of a racing recap of what we learned last weekend at the track. Stage two goes into some gambling concepts, and this week the material was pretty easy to identify for our main talking points there. In stage three, we get into a race preview for the fourth road course of the season. You can follow Chris on Twitter at Chris Wormy. That's ChrisWerme15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. And most importantly, you can follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod, and we will get to the gambling ramifications of the disqualification of both the 11 and 18 in Stage 2 today. But rather than dwell on that at the top of the show, Chris, let's get into some of the racing that we saw on track. And obviously, Chase Elliott becomes the beneficiary, doesn't lead a single lap, yet finds a way to win yet another race and continue the run of hot finishes that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. First time since 1960 in NASCAR where you had this kind of situation unfold. For all of you out there that are new to NASCAR, I'm sure the household name Emmanuel Zervakis for being disqualified for an oversized fuel cell is going to win you a few bar bets and or trivia questions that come up. Top two cars go through full teardown. Other cars are selected at random. Just to kind of give you an indication of what unfolded for those folks who may be listening for the first time, NASCAR stated that there were extra layers of vinyl on the lower fascia of the cars as the culprit. Now, the lower fascia, that's the bottom part of the car's nose. It attaches to the splitter. All of this, Worm, new to me because I don't know a damn thing about how these cars are put together, so I find it fascinating. But when you get NASCAR coming out ruling with such an iron fist, I think it just goes to show how serious they are about trying to level the playing field for the next-gen cars. And they warned teams earlier in the season that if you're going to tinker, you're going to tamper with things, if you don't disclose it to us, you're going to face harsh penalties. And those two weren't the only drivers that suffered, as Michael McDowell also loses 100 points for changing his car with an L2 infraction.
Yeah, let's not can we go back to this penalty in 1960? Like, could you imagine what that's like? Someone's talking about, well, the fuel window is 55 laps here at whatever speedway, and old Emmanuel Zervakis made it like 72 laps to win the race. You don't think that they're going to tear that car apart and go, you gotta
just think about it though. If you didn't have the same level of TV coverage and you didn't have the scoring pylon, maybe somebody out there lost track and didn't realize that, hey, look, we've all had to pit twice. This dude's been out there on the one-stop strategy, and he's out there making time, and he's put the whole field 6 to 8 laps down.
Oh, that's hilarious. I mean, I remember back in the I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years ago when Boyer seemed to be winning every race on fuel. I kind of thought that maybe he had a larger fuel cell, but I mean I just think it's a funny way to cheat. Like, you didn't think they were going to catch you? Like, they're catching what they catch these days. Obviously, with the technology is very different, and the minutia of what they can do to these cars is crazy. So, but I just think the oversized fuel cell is amazing. I love it.
Yeah, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And obviously, we've seen the culture and the tradition around the sport. You try and bend the rules and you get your hand slapped. And in NASCAR's credit, they did say before the season started that if they had seen things that they deemed to be giving these teams competitive advantages or something to modify the car, that they were going to rule with an iron fist. What I found fascinating is that you disqualify the 11 and 18. They end up 35th and 36th, but that's the extent of what the penalties look like, whereas Michael McDowell, that goes through a full teardown, he ends up losing his 100 points and properly modified parts on his machine. Crew Chief Blake Harris fined $100,000 and issued a 4-race suspension. So Joe Gibbs Racing wasn't the only one that suffered stiff penalties. One thing on Chase Elliott, and I applaud him for being the face of the sport. I mean, he says he thought they were lucky, and rightfully so. Again, no race car driver wants to win that way, and whether it gets overturned or not, this, of course, coming before we realized that JGR wasn't going to try and appeal the penalty. I'm not going to celebrate somebody's misfortune or whatever for that situation. Doesn't seem right to me. I crossed the line third. That's how I'm looking at it. Also, a hat tip to the 11 for his tremendous troll job that we saw, sipping champagne with the trophy on his kitchen counter in the wake of that disqualification.
Yeah, vintage Denny. I thought it was great. I laughed. I sent it to a bunch of people. I thought it was amazing. You know, this stuff is this tech stuff is a part of NASCAR, and to be honest, I can't really cap it. So, I mean, although I find it interesting, it doesn't factor into anything that I do when it comes to making investments in future races.
Yeah, and hold that thought, because I do want to get to that as part of stage 2 when we open up this discussion as far as the gambling implications of what happened after we thought the race results were there. Of course, we go from unofficial to everything being deemed official, but there was plenty of great on-track racing that's worth discussing, and I think talking about Denny, it's a logical segue into what we saw unfold, you know, between laps 18 and 20. Off of a restart, we knew that the 11 and 1 were going to have a dust-up in some capacity. My take on this, and correct me if I'm wrong, if there wasn't previous history between those two drivers, I'm not sure anybody pays that much attention to the way it unfolded. Ross Chastain ran out of racetrack. Denny handled it like we figured he would in post-race interviews. And Ross Chastain, to his credit, like a consummate professional, owned it, said it was long overdue. But do we think this is just the tip of the iceberg and is something that may manifest itself again going forward?
Well, to address that question, I hope that it is over. I think that Denny's on to winning a championship, and I would hate, and I don't even think Denny wants to see, Ross's championship hopes kind of dashed because of, a payback. So I'm hoping that they're moving on. I think it's great to have Chastain up there in the mix, especially with Denny. It'll have more eyeballs on the sport. So I'm excited to see this kind of get put behind us. It's funny because, I tend to bet Chastain often in matchups week to week. And I always knew that I was going to lose one. This is that show where it's like, well, I had him against Byron. And, it's like, well, we lost that one, but we knew that was coming. So here's the deal. I mean, everyone's saying it's a racing incident. Listen, Denny restarted on the inside, and he didn't care if he slid up the track because it was Chastain. That's my take on this. And so he was able to race aggressively. Here's the other thing. Like, Denny killed like 3 birds with one stone here. I mean, he takes the lead because he kind of got into Chastain. He now is good on fuel because the caution came out. And now he's even. So literally it was kind of the best of, all worlds for Denny. The one thing that it did hurt, I mean, the 4 got caught up in this. And now, even though it greatly benefited the play that we had that we released, I still don't like the collateral damage aspect of this, because the 4 is, right on the edge, racing for points. They took an average race car and they were racing in the top 5. And I don't know. I just think, I just don't think Gregson Denny. I don't think Denny realized what happens when you wreck the field.
Nice Freudian slip there.
Yeah.
We'll get to that later. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So I just don't like to see, even though we faded Harvick, I don't like to see it take out a good car. Those guys worked hard all week on that, and unfortunately, if it was a racing incident, then albeit that's fine. But Harvick. I mean, I guess that kind of leads us into what we want to talk about next.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a great point, because when you see retribution, or whatever we want to call it, in NASCAR, it always seems to involve other race car drivers. Rarely does it happen in a vacuum where it's just 2 guys that had an axe to grind with one another, taking out, previous installments on one another. So Kevin Harvick gets collected there. And to your point, had a car that practiced like absolute garbage. Didn't think it had any of the potential to run in the top 15. Harvick, in conjunction with his team, seemingly every week takes a car that we're not sure what we're going to get, runs in the top 5 or top 10, and then, ultimately finishes at the tail end of the lead lap. To your point, we were able to cash the Sunday release for all of our Bet the Board listeners with the Stay Green, Sunday release. But at the same time, what did you learn about the 4 and what you can take away from practice and qualifying that may or may not be true when you're talking about getting to race day?
The one thing, I think I had mentioned it, or we had discussed this in previous episodes about how a lot of these younger guys are learning to drive these cup cars. And I think I forgot that, hey, this is everybody. No one knew how to drive this car coming into this season. So I think Kevin Harvick is learning. I think that SHR is a little bit behind the 8 ball on speed and maybe setups. I know that they've, that obviously Briscoe with a big win at Phoenix. And so, but they've been a little bit off, right? I mean, they haven't been up there. They haven't qualified super well. I mean, I know Briscoe's the exception to that, but I think that that's just kind of his driving style lends to better racing with this car. But Harvick's learning, and something kind of scared me when I think it was Steve Letarte said in the broadcast, Harvick is starting to learn this car. He's starting to understand it more. And I'm like, ooh, boy, I faded him pretty heavily this week in this matchup. And, I knew that I was in big trouble when Harvick came over the radio. I know he was struggling. I think he hadn't moved much. I think he started right around the 21st, but he was kind of working his way up. I think he was in like 16th, and he said, hey, Rodney, if you can just get me some track position, I've got something here. And I'm like, oh boy, I'm in big trouble. And we were, but you know what? We'll get lucky and we'll kind of take that. It doesn't happen that often. So I'm very thankful when it does. But, I think we just kind of have to really, instead of looking at his car in practice, just, hey, be careful fading Kevin Harvick. If you do it, make sure it's with a race-winning car and not just someone that you think can run, 7th or 8th place.
And I think that's a great point, one that we've seen, because when you look at the head-to-head matchups for Kevin Harvick, both you and I park ourselves in front of our screens on race day trying to monitor the betting market, because you get a pretty good snapshot of exactly how the more influential bettors that we don't necessarily talk to or have any relationship with view the field. And you saw money come flowing in hand over fist against Kevin Harvick. And it wasn't just in the matchup we played, where we laid $1.30 to $1.35 with Alex Bowman, balloons out to $1.80 to $1.90. Christopher Bell closes north of $2 against the 4. And when you watch the race unfold, Bell had a top 10 car. They would have been neck and neck, but not clearly a price that would have been indicative with the machine that was out there on the track. So when you're watching some of this, keep that in mind. I know a lot of folks are going, well, we don't necessarily pay attention to some of the same things, but there may be a little bit of value created when Kevin Harvick practices poorly. You see the groups that are looking at practice more than anything else and heavily weighting that, driving up the price, and maybe being able to pick off some value on the back end.
I'd like to add a little bit to that. Remember, this is one of Harvick's best tracks, and I think I discounted that a little bit too much. I mean, the guy gets around Pocono really, really well. He has historically, and I think that was just something that I had kind of overlooked when we decided to move on Bowman against him.
And I'm interested, and we'll get to Kevin Harvick a little bit later in the show, potentially, but when you look at Harvick, road courses have not exactly been his strength throughout his career, but if it wasn't for a bad pit stop at Sonoma, we'd be talking about the 4 probably already having one checkered flag, being on the inside of the playoff picture, and arguably one of the scariest drivers as he starts to build a little bit of momentum. Instead, he's got his work cut out for him going forward, but he's not the only one, because when you look at Team Penske, yes, Austin Cindric has a win. He's in the playoff field. Joey Logano's there despite a recent run of very poor performances, but Ryan Blaney's got his hands full. Led 7 laps and seemed to be on the way to a top 10 finish before he loses control of his Ford and hits the outside pit wall late in the race. Comes on, in the post-race interview saying, I just got loose. We finally got the car decent and it was my mistake. Somewhere along the way, Worm, the 12 has to figure it out. He's had race-winning speed, or maybe not quite race-winning speed, but doesn't seem to be getting the most out of his car, which is the exact 180 from Kevin Harvick, who hasn't unloaded well, gets more out of his car on race day than what we're seeing from the 12.
I think that's, you said it perfectly. Blaney just struggles back in traffic. He struggles to kind of, it's always a strategy play to get him out front. And I think that's why he led the laps in the race, is it was a pure strategy call. And whenever you're on the opposite strategy, at a certain point, you're going to find yourself back in traffic. And so many times we see guys just set up their car for that clean air. Oh, it's great. No changes. Well, when that cycle flips and you find yourself back in traffic, your car is going to handle very differently. And I just think that they either haven't adjusted well, or there's something doesn't quite make sense with that 12 team, because when he's out front, man, is he fast, but he just goes the opposite way when he's in traffic.
And I think this week you're going to see a number of different pit cycles in play. So cars are going to have to be good in clean air. They're going to have to be good picking their way through and being able to pass when they do have opportunities present themselves. Mentioned Joey Logano briefly. I mean, last 4 races for the 22, all outside the top 20. A 20th place finish, 24th, 26th, 27th. I mean, an extremely average performance. Road courses this season, he hasn't been much better, finishing 31st at COTA, 17th at Sonoma, and then 27th most recently at Road America. So we'll be interested to see what the 22 brings. And Austin Cindric, his day was really over before it started. Got collected coming off of turn 3, but we'll see if the 2 can use some of that momentum he's seen in Indianapolis in the past. Now, when we talk about the man who would have finished with a podium and hit to his credit in Chase Elliott, never really showed that he had race-winning speed. Obviously gets the win by default in this spot, but he's not bringing great cars to the track every week, yet somehow first place, second place, first place, second place, first place. Is the 9 peaking too early, or is he continuing to show that even at tracks where he doesn't historically run well, Pocono being one of them, he is going to be a top 5 car regardless of the way he looks or the way he runs for certain stretches of the race?
You know what? This kind of reminds me of Kevin Harvick talking about Jimmy Johnson after he won at Fontana, when he said, well, that 48 team just has a golden horseshoe up his ass. That's kind of what we're seeing right now with Chase Elliott. Now, listen, you have to go out there and you have to perform. And I'll tell you what, I've been critical of Chase this year just because I haven't seen kind of that dominant speed that we've seen from him in the past, and especially Hendrick. We haven't seen that as a team. But you know what? He's winning. And I don't care how you do it, whether it's team chemistry, whether it's adjustments. I don't know what's going on there, but they've done a great job of overcoming poor track position, and they find themselves in the right place at the end of the race. And I've seen a lot of teams that gamble and they don't find themselves in the right place at the end of the race, and that's your finish, right? So I think that something about that 9 team is clicking, and I can't pinpoint what exactly it is. It might be a combination of all those things, but right now they have to be the clear favorites to win the Cup, especially because he does race so well at Phoenix as well.
Well, and that's the scariest thing about it. We've seen the 9 with his back against the wall the last couple of years and really come out guns a-blazing when he has to. Well, unfortunately for the rest of the field that's competing with him, he's going to have a nice little cushion going into this year's postseason. I mean, he's got 4 wins. He's got 5 stage wins, 25 playoff points already to his credit. It actually gives him a little bit of a margin of error, which makes him that much scarier in my opinion. But to your point, no doubt the 9 has distanced himself a little bit from the field as far as being a worthy favorite. Part of the reason you're seeing him widely available in betting markets at 3-1, upwards of 4-1 if you shop around. Be remiss though, Worm, if we were recapping this race and we didn't highlight a driver's debut that came out of nowhere. The unfortunate circumstances around Kurt Busch. He ends up wrecking in qualifying, is unable to race on Sunday, and unfortunately we won't see the 45 with Kurt Busch at the helm next weekend as well, as he was ruled out earlier this week. So Ty Gibbs steps in, and I got to give the young kid credit. He's shown me a ton of maturity and a ton of poise, not just by how he raced the Cup car, but what we saw from him in good, clean racing on Saturday against Noah Gragson. And to the 45 team's credit, I also have to say they had a great game plan. They told Ty, we want you to sit back, you're not going to lose a lap, familiarize yourself with the car, get comfortable, and gradually you'll be able to pick off opportunities. And lo and behold, he comes away with a much better finish than I anticipated was possible.
I totally agree. I mean, I've also been critical of Ty Gibbs. You know, when you're running that 54 car in Xfinity Series, you're going to look fast week in and week out. And when you don't, something's wrong. And he does look fast, and he does take advantage. He races aggressively, sometimes too aggressively, in my opinion. But you want that out of a guy that's competing for a win. Now, when you're back in traffic, that's completely different. I mean, for him to just go to the back and get comfortable in the car, I mean, he beat Logano straight up. I mean, that's really impressive. I mean, I know Logano's struggling, but this is the first time this kid's ever stepped in a Cup car. And at a track that's not a standard oval. This is not a cookie cutter. I mean, this is the tricky triangle for a reason. I was really impressed, and I hope that it kind of instilled some maturity in him, and I hope that he can race that way, in the Xfinity Series as well, because those are the kind of runs. It's not necessarily the great days that win championships. It's taking the bad days and then making them solid, and I think you've seen that with Kevin Harvick this year. That's why he's still kind of in the mix, and you saw it with Ty Gibbs on Sunday, and I was really impressed with the kid.
Yeah, and it really, to be honest, I think it opened my eyes when we saw him race Kyle Larson that way at Road America in the Xfinity side. He had a chance to wreck a driver that is a former Cup champion, the defending champion at that. Went out there, tried to do things the right way, and it almost felt like there was some carryover, because there's no doubt he had multiple chances to do the same thing to Noah Gragson to be able to give himself the victory. Ty knows he's in good equipment. He's going to be racing with these guys for years to come, so it's probably not worth starting a beef and a feud that you can't put to bed, and I think that's part of the reason that everyone is so optimistic about the extremely bright future that Ty Gibbs will have, whatever ride he ultimately ends up with somewhere with JGR Racing going forward. But I think the point that you made there should resonate not just for watching on-track activities, but for sports bettors in general. If you can mitigate the damage on your bad days and maximize the opportunities when everything's going well, that's what separates the best from the rest. And I think you see some of that same manifestation in terms of the racing mentality and why the veterans are able to take bad machines that may be comfortable finishing 15th to 20th, turn them into 10th place finishes, because if you give them a race-winning machine, they're going to finish in the top 5. One last storyline I did want to highlight from last weekend. It didn't happen in the Cup Series. It actually happened in the Xfinity Series. And for those folks that may be new to racing, it didn't have any gambling ramifications or anything like that, but Sage Karam returns to Pocono for the first time after what we saw was a tragic on-race incident when he was driving open-wheel racing in IndyCar. He was pretty open about it and said it was allowed him to try and feel more confident because he was in a dark place after that. So I give the NBC Sports team credit for being able to highlight that situation, an unfortunate circumstance, but 7 years removed. Sage Karam, opening up about how traumatic that was, knowing that one of his racing compatriots, because of an incident he was involved in, passed away years ago on the track.
Yeah. This is one of those things, if you're involved in racing, you kind of remember where you were when Justin Wilson died and in the manner in which that it happened, kind of such a fluke thing, Sage kind of, wrecked, and I don't remember if it was his nose cone that ended up hitting Justin Wilson. But, it was just one of those days where it just hurt, and you never want to see it. I remember when Dan Weldon, I remember where I was, and those are things that, when I saw it on the sheet, I was kind of shocked that you wanted to bring it up. And, it was obviously a terrible day, but you know what? IndyCar went out and fixed it right away. That's why they have the shields now. And I love it when there's a quick, swift action to fix things that are unsafe and say, you know what, we screwed this up, we're going to get it right. And so hats off to IndyCar and Sage Karam for actually getting back out on the track. I can imagine that that's super traumatic for him. So hopefully in the end, everything works out well for him and we can see him race more in the stock car NASCAR series.
And I think it's one of those things that we take for granted as sports bettors, that these drivers that are out there, regardless of what series they're in, whether it's the Cup Series, Xfinity, Trucks, F1, IndyCar, IMSA, you name it. How dangerous this activity is. And I think all the governing bodies deserve a ton of credit for the safety practices that they've put in place to do everything they can when drivers are racing around at high speeds. Nothing is ever going to be perfect, but it's in a hell of a lot better place now than it would have been 15, 20 years ago at minimum. So we'll wave the green-white checker on stage 1, and we'll go into stage 2. Want to remind all of you, though, before we do so, to follow Chris on Twitter. That's Chris Werme, CHRISWERME15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there, and you can also follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. So important because that's where we pass along some of our Sunday best bets as we continue to add to our card once we have more information readily available. And obviously stage 2, normally reserved for handicapping and breaking down some of the methodologies before we arrive at our investment decisions. But this one was easy, Chris, given what we saw in the aftermath with the 11 and 18 getting disqualified and the impact it had on sports bettors. I think it highlights a major issue that's out there, and it's not just for NASCAR bettors or baseball bettors bettors or football bettors or everything else. But the importance of knowing what your bet is that you're placing, knowing what the house rules look like, and how some of those things are ultimately going to be graded should there be an unfortunate, or in this case, extremely unusual circumstance that unfolds in what we thought was going to be a ho-hum 1-2-3 finish for Hamlin, Busch, and Chase Elliott.
Yeah, this is just, a lot of the times you find out the hard way. I know we had in the past, both times that, when Chastain won at Iowa in the Truck Series, that's probably the worst beat that I've ever had. Where we made the bet definitely paid out after Tech, and we lost that bet. And then same with Hamlin at Darlington. We had him, and he didn't pass Tech as well. So sometimes you find out the hard way. I don't know that I'm going to go around and pick where I'm always going to take the best number. All the sports books that are out there, you want to have as many as you can. I'm always going to take the best number. If you want to factor this into whether you cap or not, decide which, side, whether you want it to be graded, before as an unofficial when NASCAR that checkered flag drops, or do you want to wait till after Tech? And if that factors into your thought process, then just make sure you're reading those rules. Either way, you should know the rules before making that bet.
Yeah, there are a number of books, too many to rattle off here that actually pay off on unofficial results. There are a couple of books, more so out here in the desert, that pay off waiting for Tech to be officially over before NASCAR makes the results official. And to your point, I don't think this is something where if you're walking to the window and you go, you know what, this book is going to pay off on unofficial results, so I'm going to take 12-1. Meanwhile, a book where I have to wait for official results pays out at 20-1. Take the best number, let the chips fall where they may. I can understand some of the frustration inevitably that'll happen, especially for those folks who may have been betting out in Las Vegas and thought they could walk away with a 5-1 ticket on the 11 car. But at the same time, over time, when you continue to do this, you'd hope these kind of situations will ultimately balance out. Unfortunately for us, to your point, we had Ross Chastain when that happened at Iowa. We had Denny Hamlin in Xfinity when that happened at Darlington. Though we were not on the side, and it's not to poke fun at those that did have this unfortunate circumstances impact the overall profitability of their betting card, but it's just knowing exactly what those house rules are, making sure they're black and white and transparent. The reality of it is, for sports books, they put those things up to protect themselves, but at the same time, those are protections that the players should be looking for as well. So there's no ambiguity in the wording of props, matchups, outrights, and this applies, of course, not just to NASCAR, but any of the sports bets that you're making throughout the course of the calendar year. So
yeah, I want to add something to that.
Sure, fire away.
Yeah, so a couple things. For one, it's NASCAR's job to provide great racing. So please do not be upset with NASCAR. They're just doing their job. Their job is to make sure this sport stays competitive, and that's their job. And I applaud them for doing the right thing. They thought that this was a violation of the rules, and so their job is to make sure that it's great racing. This is on you and your relationship with a sports book to make sure that you understand when you should be paid and when you aren't going to be paid. So that's just one point I'd like to make, that NASCAR is about great racing. It has nothing to do with gambling. The second point, I know that some books paid Hamlin, some paid Chase, and some paid both. If you found any that paid out on Kyle Busch, I did have a decent amount of money on him live. Let me know. I'd like to open an account at that book.
Hey, you know what? Every now and again, you get your bad beat bonus or whatever some of these shops are calling it. So maybe you have a legitimate gripe that you can take to gaming and see if they'll give you at least 10 cents on the dollar for the 18 to soften the blow for some of that pain and trouble. And to your point, talking about NASCAR, there's no doubt. And for folks out there, the conspiracy theorists and all that, they did X, Y, and Z. Couldn't be further from the truth. Teams don't conspire against one another. It's not a grandiose conspiracy to go against certain drivers. I do, however, and NASCAR fans should find it entertaining, that the driver that benefited immensely from what unfolded was the 9, but that's a different discussion for a different day.
We're all just laughing at it. We're not thinking it. We're laughing at it. That's
the whole thing, but there's plenty of great articles written about it. A lot of prominent gaming websites have covered this in great detail. And of course, if you have questions about it, by all means, tweet at us, and we're happy to try and address those. So for those folks that end up on the right side of that decision, we tip our hat to you. It's better to be lucky lucky than good in this business. And for those folks that did not, Lady Luck will smile upon you going forward. If you bet on the fastest cars week in, week out, going to be hard to separate you from your bankroll. On to stage 3 we go, but not before we let you know where you can see all of the on-track activities this weekend from the great state of Indiana. When you're looking at Friday, you'll have Xfinity practice and qualifying. That'll be 3:05 Eastern. You can see that on USA. Truck qualifying will come to you on FS1 at 4:30 Eastern, and the T-Sport 200 for the Truck Series. The first playoff race, I believe, right, Worm? Friday night. That'll be 9 Eastern on FS1. Saturday, bright and early for those folks on the West Coast, a little bit more reasonable for you out east. 9:35 Eastern time, you'll get Cup practice on USA, and at 10:35 Eastern, you'll get the qualifying for the Cup Series as well. That all leads up to a 3:30 green flag start time for the Pennzoil 150 at the Brickyard. That you can see on NBC for the Xfinity Series, and the race weekend will culminate Sunday afternoon at 11:30 Eastern with the Verizon 200 at the Brickyard, available
2:30 Eastern on Sunday.
Yep, 2:30 Eastern.
Your first mistake. At least I got to correct you. You said 11:30. It's 11:30 Pacific.
11:30. Oh, well, you know what's funny about that? You ran into the time zone fiasco this past weekend as well, did you not, with your pre-race pulls?
Whoops. Yep. That happened. Yep, that happened.
So it's all about trying to identify that folks do watch NASCAR and bet on it from different time zones. But yep, you are correct. 11:30 Pacific, 2:30 Eastern for the Cup race. And when you look at stage 3, of course, we'll preview the race. And when you're talking about Indy, 14 turns on a 2.4-mile layout at the historic Indianapolis Motor Speedway. 82 laps. We'll cover 200 miles. And when you're looking at the stage durations, 15 laps for stage 1, 20 laps for stage 2, so the stage break will come at lap 35, and a 47-lap, hopefully green flag run takes us to lap 82. I have to ask you, before we get into the track comparisons and exactly what we expect to see from certain drivers, are you happy that NASCAR made the change to go to the road course here instead of racing on the more traditional footprint for the 2.5-mile track that we used to see for the Brickyard?
From a betting standpoint, yes. I thought that the actual oval at the Brickyard was a little bit more difficult to cap. I think that, you know, road courses are just so different than ovals. I think that if you understand strategy, you can make some money. I think it's a little bit easier than the oval there at Indy. But as a traditional just race fan, man, I think the Brickyard 400, that was pretty fun to watch. And, I went to the Indy 500 this year, so it would have been cool to kind of see the comparison of the stock cars on the track. But either way, I think it's great for the sport to be in Indianapolis, whether they're on the oval or on the road course.
I always wonder if we'll see a schedule at some point where you get the traditional 2.5-mile layout on the Brickyard, one race weekend, and then you get the road course on a separate race weekend. Obviously, it'd be tremendous if you were able to run a Saturday, Sunday back-to-back, but the amount of cars you'd have to bring in the hauler to prepare your car for a road course versus a 2.5-mile oval of sorts, a little bit more difficult. And when you're talking about road courses this season, we've seen some level of unpredictability. And the reason I say that, 5 drivers so far in 2022 have earned their first career Cup victory. 3 of those 5 wins have actually come on road courses. Ross Chastain back at Circuit of the Americas was able to cash a ticket at 40-1. Sonoma, you saw the 99 car of Daniel Suarez claim his first victory. Price is widely available in that 30-1 range all week. And then, of course, a few short weeks ago at Road America, you saw Tyler Reddick pre-week go off at 25-1. That number came down substantially. Saw him close anywhere in the neighborhood of 10-1 on the low end, upwards of 14-1. And when I talk about those 3 road courses, is it as simple, Worm, as going, hey, look, we have 3 data points that we can use? Or are there certain road courses you're going to wait a little bit more, knowing that a track like Road America, for example, has a lot more tire wear than we're anticipating seeing in Indianapolis?
Yeah, this is a tough question. I'm not 100% sure. I guess I'm going to kind of look at the body of work of road courses and then try to take into account, okay, Sonoma's going to probably be the most technical track. So, but it's more technical than I think Indy. COTA doesn't seem to have too much tire wear, but they still matter. Road America, obviously super, super long and a ton of tire wear, but there wasn't a lot of passing kind of at any of those tracks. So, I'm going to kind of look at just guys that have kind of qualified well on those road courses. I think those are the guys that you'd want to look at for a potential investment. But to just pick out one or the other, I mean, honestly, probably the Roval would be the most, closely correlated, but we haven't run there yet in this car. So to kind of speculate what that would look like might be a little irresponsible. So I'm just going to kind of take the body of work. I'm not going to, say, I'm going to discount one or the other. Just kind of take into account road course racing and where these drivers are at right now at this point in the season.
And for those folks who normally like to lean on some of the historicals, obviously we've tried to discourage you from doing it a ton, knowing that the next-gen car handles differently. This will only be the second time that the Cup boys have run on this particular road course, and we saw A.J. Allmendinger actually win the race last year after starting 8th. Ends up leading just 2% of the laps, did finish with the third highest driver rating. That race, unfortunately, was marred by extended delays as there were massive track repairs that went on, as there was one particular turn where you had a turtle taking care of the undercarriage on a lot of race cars. But Kyle Larson and Chase Elliott had two of the best rides, and teammate William Byron actually ran 75 laps inside the top 15 before a late race incident ultimately had him finish 33rd. So I feel when we're looking to try and handicap some of the big names this weekend, we can start at the top of the odds board. And of course, we see Chase Elliott priced anywhere from 3.5 to 1 on the low end, upwards of 4.5 if you shop around. Kyle Larson checks in behind him in that 6.5 to 7 to 1 range. You're looking at Ross Chastain, 7 to 1, 8 to 1 thereabouts, and everybody else drops into double digits, a group that includes Tyler Reddick, Daniel Suarez, Austin Cindric, Chase Briscoe, Martin Truex, Ryan Blaney, Kyle Busch, etc., before you get into some of the 20 to 1 shots. So most logical place for us to start should be with HMS, and when we can talk about Chase Elliott, he hasn't won a road course since, and I put that in quotation marks, Road America last year. He has led 62 laps so far on road courses this season. His average finish better than 5th, 5 straight finishes, as we talked about at the top of the show, overall a 1st or 2nd. When you're handicapping the 9 car, what are your expectations this weekend?
Well, I think that he's going to run in the top 3. I mean, there's nothing that says that he's going to struggle at all. He's obviously, that team is clicking. He's got speed in his race car. They've overcome adversity. They're able to, if they make a mistake, they're able to kind of work their way back up through the field. And, he's good on road courses, and he might not be as dominant as he's been in the past, but he's been super solid. And right now, it seems like those guys that are just kind of taking what their car gives them and just, I guess, kind of biding their time has really paid off for the 9 team. I expect them to be good. If someone wanted to, someone said to me, I think I'm just going to bet Elliott and Larson and then check my accounts on Monday morning, I'd go, that's probably a pretty good strategy.
Well, speaking of the 5 car, he's won 3 out of the last 7 road courses, finished 3rd at Road America and led 26 laps at Sonoma back in June. Did finish 29th at COTA earlier this year, 15th at Sonoma, gaining a little bit of momentum, but we keep waiting for that light to go on for the 5 car. Have you found him difficult to handicap on a week-in, week-out basis? Because I know when we talk, he hasn't been on one of our outright cards. I can't speak to what you're doing live in race because I know that's a very different science in and of itself, but I haven't had an outright bet on the 5 in probably 10 to 12 races at minimum.
He just hasn't been the same car as last year, and I think road courses are a clear advantage for him. I expect him to run better on road courses than I do ovals right now. I don't know if just the road course package is better or he's just spent more time in the sim or whatever it may be. Larson's become a great road course racer. I just haven't seen the speed. It's so funny. We say Larson and we think just, oh, well, he's going to practice well, he's going to qualify well, and he'll probably run in the top 3. But he hasn't really been a factor in these races at all. Like, yeah, he's been running, maybe between 3rd and 7th place, but he hasn't run anybody down and taken the lead. So I'm not super high on Larson. I do, like I said, I think him and Chase are definitely the guys to beat. I know, went out on a real limb there, but I have to tell you what I think, and I think that those guys are the clear favorites going into this week.
Yeah, and I don't think we have to really deep dive on their teammates either. When you look at the way Alex Bowman and William Byron have run, Alex Bowman did finish 2nd at Circuit of the Americas at COTA back at the first road race, but the last 2 times we've seen him finish outside the top 10. 8 straight finishes 8 straight races of no finishes better than 10th for the 48. So clearly looking to try and gain some form. When you look at the 24, average road course finish this year, a shade worse than 12th, but he has shown some speed. And as we talked about a little bit earlier, did run real well here last year at Indianapolis, despite not having the best finish to speak of. Team Penske for me this weekend is extremely interesting, Worman. We talked about Ryan Blaney, the most points of any driver yet to clinch a playoff berth. Runner-up here last year at IMSA. DMS. He's only led 6 laps on road courses this season, but he hasn't had a finish worse than 11th. That came at Road America. He's got a pair of 6th-place finishes. When you're handicapping the 12 on a pre-week look, kind of the wait-and-see approach because you want to see how he unloads more than anything else?
Yeah, I haven't seen much from him on road courses this year. And I'm not saying that like the 6th and the 2 6th-place finishes aren't great finishes, or even the 11th at Road America. He just hasn't like passed a ton of cars. He's just kind of, made up a position or two, but hasn't really kind of driven to the front. And, the one thing that he does need, and he's going to be racing aggressively, I think he's going to need to win. And so I would expect him to be very aggressive. If you're going to be looking to make some plays on Blaney, definitely take the higher payouts. Maybe take him to win if you're interested. I wouldn't take him in matchups just in case he ends up on the wrong end of an aggressive bit of strategy. That would be my advice when it comes to someone like Blaney, who's, I'm not saying he's checkers or wreckers, but man, if he has a car capable of winning, I would expect him to be very aggressive on strategy.
Do you feel there are certain drivers this weekend that you're going to watch specifically because you believe they're going to race for points versus racing for the win?
That's a tough question. I mean, obviously, you think about it with even the guys with one win for sure, the Cindric and, Reddick. For me, I think Cindric, I would say Reddick will more likely race for points than Cindric. And here's why. Cindric probably can't race his way. Like, if it comes down to the points after a win, I don't think Cindric thinks he can point his way through to the playoffs if that becomes the case. He's going to need to win another race if that's the case. So we do have another road course coming in Watkins Glen, but this is Cindric's home track. This is where he wants to win more than anything. And you saw the jubilation of him when he won last year. In the Xfinity Series, and he got a chance to kiss the bricks. And I think that if Cindric has a top 5 car, I expect him to go for the win. I think that they'll throw points out the window. I think it means too much to this team, to his family, and into Indianapolis Motor Speedway to see kind of this Cindric, get it to victory lane. The other thing is he's really great on road courses. I expect to see Cindric run well this week. What you saw, I think they learned a good lesson at Road America. They went out and decided that they were going to win stage 1, and that took them completely out of the race. I think he ended up finishing like 6th or 7th, but he was out of the race. He had no chance at winning because he stayed out and won that stage. I don't think they'll make the same mistake again. I expect him to be aggressive, and I think Cindric will be a top 5 car this week.
Yeah, and this was one, foolishly enough, that I thought was going to slip past the goalie. Hope that we were going to get an opener. It's some books at prices north of 20-1, but credit to the odds makers out there. That was not the case. Priced him correctly. And I think to your point, it's trying to identify him and where you might be able to find a little bit of value in some of the head-to-head matchups or some of the ancillary markets that'll be available. From team at Penske to JGR, and I guess this has been the toughest collection of drivers for me to handicap on road courses so far this season. I mean, Bell has been the best finisher in the quartet. He finished 3rd at COTA. Truex also finished top 10 in that particular race. None of the 4 drivers finished better than 26th at Sonoma, and Martin Truex Jr. was the best finisher at 13th at Road America. I don't even know how to begin to handicap these drivers when you're talking about what you're going to get from the 11, 18, 19, or 20 this weekend and the potential speed they could bring to Indianapolis.
I mean, you want to talk about, we talked about price elasticity last week. I mean, you have Kyle at 16, Hamlin in that 18 to 20 range. You want to see some odds drop, have those guys unload well. I mean, those odds will go down to 6 to 7 to 1 in a heartbeat because Hamlin was great here last year. Obviously, kind of got punted, and that cost him the race. But listen, there's been nothing that's shown that these guys have anything on road courses. And I think that Chris Bell, you kind of throw him as a little bit of an outlier. He's young, and Chris Bell, I think, is one of the hardest guys to handicap just in general. His driving style, he can go from a lap down to leading the race, and I never know when that's going to happen. But you kind of know what you're going to get with Denny and Kyle. And they've even looked good in practice and raced poorly. So at this point, I'm kind of out on JGR. If you want to take a flyer on them, maybe just to win the race, you might get some value, but you're not guaranteed. Just because they look good in practice, they have not raced well in these road course races.
Yeah, ironically enough, when you're talking about consistency, it was the 18 for a long stretch earlier this year, but the 20 is starting to come into his own. You look at some of the finishes he's put together, finished fourth at Pocono, finished first, obviously getting that big win in Loudon. Did finish 2 races in 18th, 19th, but had a number of top 10 finishes to boot before that. But clearly, to your point, a 4-driver grouping that I just can't really wrap my head around in terms of what I'm going to see from a week in, week out basis. The same cannot be said, though, for Team Trackhouse and Ross Chastain, Daniel Suarez, seemingly unloading with speed every single week. Ross Chastain, 3 top 10s in the road courses this season, highlighted by his win at Circuit of the Americas. Best average finish of any driver on road courses this season. Meanwhile, Daniel Suarez is tied with Chase for 62 laps led on road courses this year. Now, 47 of those did come in his win at Sonoma, but that in no way, shape, or form diminishes what he's been able to accomplish. His average finish is 10th. If you back out his finish outside the top 20 in Austin earlier this year, significantly better. Realistic expectations for the 1 in 99 this weekend.
So I think that they're going to race well for sure. I think, we have to look at this through the odds lens as well. I just think that right now there's not a ton of value on those guys. I think they're kind of properly priced. Suarez is one of those guys that we could see that opts to stay out, not undercut, and maybe take some stage points. So, in Chastain, like I said, if 7.5 to 1. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get an argument from me there if you like him. I think he'll be competitive. He's going to have to qualify a little better than he has. I think that, for him to win from as far back as he did, both of those guys to win, I think those are a little bit outliers at this point. I think you see guys that qualify well will actually race well. I don't think you'll see guys kind of peeling up through the field. If it is, it'll probably be a road course ringer like someone like Dinger, who we'll get to in a second. But right now, I just think that Trackhouse is kind of properly priced.
Now, we joke about it all the time, and I think Ross Chastain has assuaged some of our concerns about an ability to bet on him in head-to-head matchups. Do you feel more confident with Daniel Suarez being a driver that you actually can go to the window, bet in a head-to-head, and feel that he's going to go out there and put together a good race? Or is it still a little bit more of a wait-and-see approach for the 99 on a week-in, week-out basis?
I would say it's a little bit more wait-and-see, just because you'll know pretty quickly what Suarez has. And if you're able to kind of jump on some live odds or even just see him unload, I mean, he did unload well at Sonoma, so that wasn't like a secret or it wasn't a surprise. It might have been a surprise that he went out there and won the race, but he also did get lucky with Larson losing a wheel. So otherwise, we're talking about him not having won a race at this point. So I think yes, he can be good. I just am not, positive to unload on him at a pre-week price. Or pre-practice or pre-qualifying without being 100% sure, especially when you see him, his odds, right around the 12 to 14 to 1 range, which is way different than the 30 to 1 we saw at Sonoma.
Well, and you mentioned Dinger, and this is the definition of a driver who is going to go out there and race for one thing, and that's the win. He's not out there for stage points. He's not out there for a Sunday cruise. And when you look at Dinger's price, widely available from a low of about 18 to 1, upwards of 22 to 1 if you shop around. He did grab the checkered flag here last year, but when you look at Dinger's overall body of work, he goes from being a road course ringer to a driver that over his last 11 road courses does have 5 top 10s to his credit, 2 top 5s, including a win, but he also has 6 finishes of 15th or worse. Is that feast or famine type approach make Dinger the kind of driver that if you believe in for race day, you're going to bet him in the outright market, but not going to try and focus on him in head-to-heads? Yeah,
I'm definitely, selling him when it comes to matchup stuff. Listen, he was decent here last year, and obviously a different car. He was pretty lucky to win the race. Now, here's what if this becomes a race that kind of these cautions breed cautions, and you find yourself in multiple restarts. he is a guy that can for sure win. I think he came back. I think he restarted. There were 2 restarts late in the race where he's able to pick up spots, and he's ultra aggressive, and he's a great road course racer. Now, he might not have the same car in the long run, but if we find ourselves in a 5-lap shootout and he's starting in the first 3 rows, look out. That guy can win the race for sure, and maybe win by a couple seconds. Now, if it is a long run, I think you'll see better cars tend to run him down. But man, if it comes down to a restart, I fully expect Allmendinger to be in the mix and potentially win the race.
And the one thing we've seen from Dinger, he ain't afraid to throw his nose in there when he comes up to the Cup Series. He knows he's not racing for a championship at this level. His focus is a lot more on the Saturday side, and he'll get plenty of added track time as he is actually the favorite for the Xfinity race in the Pennzoil 150. We're talking about other road course racers who could factor in to podium finishes or make a dance card in some capacity. 2 other guys I want to highlight. One would be Tyler Reddick. We talked a little bit about him earlier on in the show. Did get his first win at Road America. Showed his racing chops running down Chase Elliott and being able to pull away. He also finished 5th at COTA earlier this year, did finish 35th at Sonoma. And then when you're looking at where he was last year, he had a runner-up finish at the Roval, starting to build his confidence. Chris Buescher, also a very strong performance at the Roval, 3rd last year, led 4 laps and finished 2nd at Sonoma. He's got back-to-back top 10 finishes on road course, and his average finish this year better than 10th. So if you're trying to assess the 17 and the 8 this weekend, guys that you feel are going to have their say in terms of how things unfold.
Well, I'll start with Reddick. I mean, he's one of those guys that could potentially be racing for points. I'm not sure. I don't think that'll happen. By the way, I think any guy or any driver that has a race-winning car will go for the race win. I just can't. It's just not in a driver's blood to just. I mean, even Jimmy Johnson couldn't do it at the Roval. Like, he had to wreck Martin Truex to try to go for the win.
I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about that race. I don't want to talk about that race.
Well, it was a dominant 12 car that won that race. Anyway, it's just, you can't help but go for the win. And so I do, if Reddick looks good in practice, he's obviously going to run well. I think that he'll go for the win if he does think he has, a top, 3 to 5 car. When it comes to Buescher, I obviously think he's great, but the secret's out, not he's matched up against, I've seen, Michael McDowell's match. I mean, Michael McDowell's a great road course racer in his own right. So these guys are, I just think the secret's out on Buescher. I don't think there's any value on him, even in matchups as well. Until I see some higher odds and I actually see him go out there and pass fast cars, I'm just going to kind of sit on the sidelines, and if he looks good live and we can get a decent number, I'll nibble there. But to your point, I just think Buescher's kind of properly priced. I think you see maybe even more value on Reddick because he's proven that he's had the fastest car multiple times this season.
And when we talk about numbers, I mean, it goes back to what we've hearkened on and will every episode until they ultimately hand out the championship trophy on November 6th in Phoenix. It's all about the number. A driver like Chris Buescher would be a great bet potentially if you saw him at 60-1 or 75-1. At 30-1, it's a much different handicap, and you're seeing odds makers adjust by how the 17 has run at these road courses throughout the season. To your point, talking about Tyler Reddick, his price has only come down a shade from where he was pre-week at Road America, and you saw him have a race-winning car that he ultimately took to victory lane. So it's all about the number when you're trying to build your race card, especially when we're talking about getting in early at some of these pre-week prices. Stage 1 complete. Stage 2, we waved the green-white checker flag, and we wave the checkered flag for stage 3 and completion. You can follow Chris on Twitter at Chris Werme, ChrisWerme15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And last, but certainly not least, our final order of business to transact. And we did not have the most fortune working in our favor with Cole Custer on the Xfinity side last Saturday, but that's the risk we run trying to get out early and grab you guys the best number, especially going into qualifying sessions. But where are you seeing an investable opportunity for a smaller position pre-week before we load up with our Sunday stuff?
Yeah, so this week I'm going to concentrate on someone that we did touch on, and that's Austin Cindric. He knows his chances of winning are at the more technical of road courses. And I would say that this is much more technical than a Watkins Glen, where it's going to be a little bit more straight line speed and just, raw horsepower and more aero. So I'm going to take my position on him. He's a top 5 price. A plus 160 is kind of readily available. I expect him to qualify well here, and I expect him to go for the win. So I don't think you'll see him stay out at all during the stages. I fully expect him to go for the win because I do think he'll have a top 3 car. And if anyone's going to go out there and challenge those Hendrick guys, I think it's going to be that 2 Penske car. Give me Austin Cindric top 5 at plus 160 this week.
Oh, we know that Penske loves to run well at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Roger would be extremely happy if he's able to grab a checkered flag for one of his drivers. We know the close relationship with the Cindric family there, and the 2 car should unload with plenty of race-winning potential. Anything else you would like to add, my friend, before we close up shop on this fine evening and bid our listeners a fond farewell until we reconvene 7 days from now?
Yeah, let's just touch on the Cole Custer thing.
Sure.
I actually thought that Cole was going to be really good, and that's on me. I thought that that they would unload well, and they didn't. But here's what we did. I turned around, and because he did not look good in practice, we were able to turn around and then fire against him in matchups and find value that way. So, you don't fall in love with your bets when you have new information. Changing your mind is a superpower. And if you're able to just change your mind and say, you know what, this is kind of a sunk cost, I need to make money from this point on. We were able to do that because we faded Cole. He did not look good in practice or in qualifying. So for those of you that are paying attention, and if you think that, listen, if you take something early in the week and practice shows you something else, by all means, fire the other way, because that's new information and you have to figure out a way to make money from it.
Yeah, and oftentimes in sports betting, there are some sunk costs. You see it when you're live betting any sports out there, that teams just don't match up in the trenches. A particular quarterback or starting pitcher doesn't have it. And despite running your numbers and whatever mathematical models and data that you're looking at, you can have the right to change your mind as a sports bettor. You obviously don't want to create a reverse middle for yourself, but in that kind of situation, hey, look, it became a sunk cost on Cole Custer. Wish you would have run better, especially when we give stuff out pre-week. But unfortunately, the 07 car just did not have that front-running speed, despite trying to work his way into the top 10. For Chris Wormy, I am Todd Furman. Appreciate all of you guys for tuning in each and every week to the Stay Green podcast. As always, it'll be available first thing Friday morning for you. And check the website to look for all updated Sunday matchups. As Chris will talk about until he's blue in the face, when you have all that information and data readily accessible, those are the strongest positions. That's how, if you want to bet this sport seriously, you try and make a little money. We had Lady Luck smile upon us last Sunday with Alex Bowman over Kevin Harvick. Let's hope this week we can get a box-to-wire race winner. But in the meantime, with an Austin Cindric top 5 ticket in hand, come Sunday afternoon, hopefully we'll see you at the window.